Good morning, everybody. A lot of people are asking themselves today what on earth was happening in Russia over the last 24 hours since Friday evening and on through Saturday when the Wagner group uh, supposedly, and it looked like they were starting a coup against President Putin. First of all, taking over the city of Rostov-on-Don in the south of Russia, and then marching, or said not marching literally on foot, but traveling very fast with a convoy of military vehicles towards Moscow. My thoughts yesterday at the time was this is just a ruse. It's something that is theatre, was organised between Putin and Prigozhin. There was no danger of any kind of coup happening. It was for something else. Now, I wish I'd said that yesterday, but I held fire on saying what I thought because you just don't know. And if you say the wrong thing, you end up with egg on your face. Like a lot of people in the West and in the Zelensky regime today, obviously not everyone in the West, but the deep state powers and mainstream media, warmongering cheerleaders who were hoping for regime change and that this was going to come very, very quickly. It didn't. There was never any danger of that. But what I thought yesterday this was about, and I've actually been, I may be wrong on this because no one said anything about this, but what I thought this was to stop an imminent attack on the Zaporozhye nuclear power station, because over the last week, in the days leading up to what happened in Russia yesterday, the Zelensky regime, Zelensky himself, was saying that if Russia attacks this nuclear power station in Zaporozhye, the largest nuclear power station in Europe, then there will be an escalation of war. And then you've got the American warmongers, Blinken, and so on, Lindsey Graham, saying that if there's an attack on this, then that's an attack on NATO. And obviously, Russia is not going to attack the nuclear power station, which is under its own control and is using now to generate electricity for southern Ukraine and the Crimea. They're not going to blow it up because, one, they're using it, and two, they wouldn't want an environmental disaster, which, depending on which way the wind blows, could blow nuclear material either west or east or north or south. Everyone's going to be affected. Ukraine, Russia, and NATO, EU countries as well are going to be affected. So they don't want this. But there are some crazy nut jobs in the US government who would happily blow this up in order to escalate the war, because they just want to keep escalating and keep this war going, this proxy war, and prolong it as long as possible, because the military companies that some of them have investments in are making a huge amount of money out of this. They're making a killing from selling weapons to Ukraine. They don't care about Ukrainian men dying or Russian men dying or Eastern European men in NATO countries in the east of Europe, Poland, Slovakia, Lithuania, Estonia. Those people will be next to be sent to the front line. The people in the US State Department don't care about them. They just care about their money. And the money laundering and corruption in Ukraine is just incredible. And obviously the Biden family are, neck deep, up to their necks in that, in the corruption that goes on in Ukraine in various ways. So the people in the US State Department would happily blow up this nuclear power station in order to escalate the war. They are that insane. That's what would happen. So I thought, going back to the main point of this, the events of the Saturday this week, where there was this supposed coup that wasn't. I thought it was to deflect attention away from that, so that this imminent fake false flag event that was going to happen, where the Zelensky regime was going to blow up the Zaporozhye nuclear power station and blame it on the Russians to escalate the war, didn't happen. So this was some huge dramatic internal event, as it was presented as this, and then people would start to question. There was a Cobra meeting in London. There was all the politicians and military people in the West and in NATO got together in meetings all over the place and decided, what are they going to do? There's regime change coming. They were rejoicing that Putin might soon fall. And the bizarre thing is that a lot of people who were totally against the Wagner private military company, because they essentially won the Battle of Bakhmut over 8 months or so and have just withdrawn from there, suddenly decided to support the Wagner Group as their heroes who might instigate regime change in Russia. And then as soon as there was a deal done, and Lukashenko in Belarus negotiated a peace between Putin and Prigozhin, and everything diffused and de-escalated. As soon as that happened, all the warmongers in the collective West and in the Zelensky regime, who suddenly turned around and were supporting the Wagner Group and Prigozhin as their guys, were now dead against them again. So they've gone from being glorified as heroes back to being the enemy again in a few hours. So the reaction of the warmongers is very, very clear to see, and they didn't get what they wanted, obviously. But what this has also done, which is incredible, it's very incredibly clever, is that by this fake coup, which was all arranged, it seems, I think this was all just staged, so that people looking on who didn't know what was going on would think that this was happening, but it wasn't. So what's happened from that is that Putin can now see very clearly who are traitors, who are rebels in Russia, and who would have jumped on this to actually instigate regime change. And CIA assets, NATO assets working, the secret agents and spies within the Russian Federation who were activated in order to try to agitate the situation are also seen. So they can see who they are, and there's ongoing counter-terrorism operations in Russia to arrest the people who were foreign assets and domestic assets, and domestic agitators and rebels who would have jumped on this and tried to instigate regime change within Russia. So Putin can now clearly see who all of his internal enemies are and all of the foreign agents are, and can round them up and deactivate them in his own way. Say no more. It's also shown up some of the plans of the Zelensky regime and the Ukrainian armed forces, because when they thought the Putin government was going to be very weak and was going to be on its way out, they started to attack harder in certain places and gave away some of their military strategy, which now the Russian armed forces can see. Coup was over within, the fake coup was over within 24 hours. And what the situation on the battlefront in Ukraine hasn't changed at all. It's back to normal. And also they've been able to redeploy a huge amount of weaponry and troops into Belarus, southern Belarus, and on the northern border of Ukraine, which is very interesting because that's all happened at the same time as there was this supposed coup going on, the coup that wasn't. So very interesting things happening there. But the situation is for the warmongers in the West who are cheering this on, they've all got to cope with the fact that this wasn't anything more than a ruse, and they've been caught out by that. So a very interesting few hours a day going on, but I sincerely hope that no one is going to attack this nuclear power station. Russia certainly wouldn't, any more than it would have blown up the Nord Stream pipelines, which was blamed on Russia. But of course, they're not going to blow up their own pipelines. And as Seymour Hersh wrote in his Substack piece a few months ago, it's almost certain that this was carried out by the US government with the help of Norwegian special forces. And both of those countries, governments, have got vested interests which would benefit from the Nord Stream pipelines being blown up. Of course, Norway opened a new gas pipeline to Poland very soon after the Nord Stream pipelines going from Russia to Germany were blown up. So they've got vested economic interests, and of course the US is now selling huge amounts of natural gas or liquefied natural gas to Europe, to European countries. So they're benefiting economically from that as well. But that's a sort of slightly different issue. Back to the nuclear power station, of course, as I was saying, there's no way that Russia would damage that at all. But the crazy warmongers of the West would. And that really needs to be stopped. And hopefully what happened yesterday will do something to stop that happening. Perhaps even Putin has got more information on the sort of people who would have carried out such a false flag operation, which would have been a disastrous escalation for everybody in the whole region. So, interesting day. But this will disappear from the news cycle, I think, very, very quickly, especially in the West, because all the cheerleaders of regime change are now going home to lick their wounds because they didn't get what they wanted. We should just de-escalate as well in the West. End this conflict. Could be done very, very easily if you got the right people in power. We need regime changes in the West. Democratically, of course. In the next elections, we need to vote people in to government in the US, in the UK, Germany, France, who do not support escalating this war, will make peace and will get back to normal relations with both Russia and Ukraine. There you go. Have a good day, everybody.